Hello and welcome to the video. In this one, we are going to build a client SDK using oats based on the OpenAPI document we have been using in this series. If this doesn't sound familiar, I'd recommend checking out the playlist, especially video 2 and 3, as even though you'll be able to follow this video without much context, there will be a lot of things that I won't explain in detail to keep this video focused. To get started, I'm opening the good old demo page to set up a new oats configuration. I'm clicking on configuration first, and I'm starting on the reader tab. I'm setting protocol to HTTPS, language to JSON, and just as last time, I'm going to use bookstore as input. In your case, you'd need to use your own OpenAPI document. I'm switching to the generator tab. I make sure that I'm using the preset configuration style. I'm picking the client preset. I'm changing path provider to by generator target. You'll see the effects of this later, it's quite dramatic. Lastly, I'm changing root path to src/generated. I'm going to leave the validator and writer tabs alone, the defaults are fine. Now just as last time, I'm clicking on package.json, I'm copying the contents, then I'm going over to my brand new project in VS Code. I'm creating a file called package.json, and I'm pasting the contents here. I'm opening a terminal and running npm install so that it can do its thing in the background. Now I'm going back to the demo page and I'm clicking on generate.ts next. I'm copying its content, then I'm going back to VS Code. I'm creating a file with the same name, generate.ts, and I'm pasting the contents. With that, we are done with the demo page. I'm going to just close it. I'm opening package.json again in VS Code, and I'm customizing a few things. I'm changing the name of my imaginary package. Let's call it @bookstore/SDK. I'm changing the description to let's say bookstore TypeScript SDK. And at this point, npm install should be complete, so let's generate next. I'm running npm run oats that will put our SDK code in src/generated. Let's have a look at that next. If you remember, the generated output we were using previously was structured in a way so that each of our generated artifacts were put into its own file, and we also grouped them into folders by concern because we were using the default path provider. With this path provider, we generate the same code, except it groups our code into separate files by concern, meaning that, for example, all our request types will be grouped into the requesttypes.ts file. Now let's create an index.ts file in the src folder that will serve as the entry point to our package once it's deployed. I'm creating a default exported function called bookstore SDK, which takes no arguments, and its return type is bookstore SDK. In the function's body, I'm returning a new bookstore SDK imp. This needs an adapter parameter, for which we are going to use a new fetch client adapter that I'm going to import from the appropriate oats package. To this adapter, we can pass in the base URL, which I'm just going to leave empty for now, as we don't have an actual deployed instance of the backend. With this factory function, our users can create an SDK instance, and if we were to have any global inputs, like an API key for example, we could take that as a parameter here. Next, our users might want to actually use the model, request, response, and parameter types, so let's export them. Here I'm exporting everything from types, query types, path types, request header types, response header types, request types, response types, and finally SDK type. And with that, we are done with coding. You can obviously customize as much or as little what you are exposing from the code generated by oats. Next, we need to set up our build. For this, I'm opening package.json first. I'm creating an entry called build, and it's simply going to run the TypeScript compiler tsc. But for this to work, we need to configure the compiler, so let's do that next. I'm creating a file called tsconfig.json in the project root. Let's open this file and add an object as the root. Let's configure include next. I'm going to add a single path, our source folder, /src. Let's configure exclude next. I'm just going to add node modules. Lastly, let's set up compiler options. I'm setting module to CommonJS, target to ES 2022. I'm turning on strict mode. And I'm also enabling ES module interop. So far, everything is the same as our backend's configuration, but we need a few extra things. I'm setting declaration to true, so we not only get JavaScript output, but also type definitions. Outdir to /lib. This is where our build output will appear. And finally, I'm setting lib to an array with 2 entries, ES 2022 and DOM. Let's check if this works by running npm run build. And this created a lib folder in the project root that has all our stuff compiled, plus it has declarations for all our compiled files. This is nice, but for this to work as a package, we need to change a few things in package.json. I'm adding an entry called main, and its value is going to be lib/index.js. This is so that the entry point to our compiled code can be found. Then I'm adding typings, and its value is going to be lib/index.d.ts. This is a hint for the TypeScript compiler and tooling where to find typings for our package. Lastly, I'm adding an entry called files. Its value is going to be an array, and we are adding a single entry called lib. With this, we minimize the size of the package we deploy, as we are only including the lib folder, and the npm guys won't run out of storage space because of us. I'm not going to deploy it, but the only thing you need to do at this point is run npm login in your terminal, log in with your credentials, bump your version if needed, then run npm publish. And lastly, I want to show you how it will look like for a user when they consume this package. For this, I'm creating a file in src called dummy.ts. I'm importing the default export from index.ts, and I'm going to call it bookstore SDK. Obviously, in a real situation, a user will be importing from your deployed and installed package. I'm creating a constant called SDK, and its value is going to be a bookstore SDK call. With this, we have a fully typed SDK on which we can access all methods corresponding to our endpoints. And if we want to use some of the typings, we can just use the named exports with the usual syntax by typing a comma and curly braces after our default import. That concludes this video and this video series as well. If you have any questions, comments, feedback, or anything you'd like to share, please do so in the comments or on the discussion page on GitHub. Links as always in the description. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the upcoming guide and update videos.